There are many people in this room today with the last name Slade. There are also many other last names that have become part of our family tree. But we all come from the same place and the same people. The knowledge of our family tree travels back over 100 years. This is your family tree. Everyone in this room is a product of Geneva Slade and Fletcher Slade Jr. But we have to start before that. We have to start with their parents. We are going to start on Geneva Slade's side first. Geneva Slade's mother, Alice Brown, also known as Grandma, was born in Columbia, South Carolina. Alice was born to her mother, who was also named Alice Brown, and her father, Major Brown, on April 13, 1908. Although there are some discrepancies about her actual birth date due to bad record keeping for blacks back in the early 1900s, Alice used this date as her birthday until her time of death. Alice had 12 brothers and sisters, one of the youngest being her sister Wilhelmina Brown, better known as T. Willie, or Wilhelmina, was born in 1912, 4 years after Alice was born. When Alice was very young, her mother died giving birth to her last child. With Alice being a great woman, she took on the role of mother for her younger brothers, and they sent Willie to live with their aunt. Alice eventually would meet Thomas Anderson, who she wedded and moved to New York with in 1929 to have their first child, Jay Anderson. They would eventually have their second child, Geneva Anderson, better known as Granny, in 1931. Now, to keep everything in perspective, we are switching sides of the family from Granny's side to Granddaddy's side. Then we'll bring the story all back together. The other side of the tree starts in North Carolina with Eugenia Hensley, better known as Mama Jean, and Fletcher Slade Sr., better known as Mr. Slade, in the 1920s. With Eugenia Hensley and Fletcher Slade Sr. being deeply in love, they decided to take a crack at the big city. Eugenia Hensley would become Eugenia Slade, and they would move to New York in the early 1900s. Eugenia and Fletcher would eventually have a child, Fletcher Slade Jr., in 1929. Eugenia and Fletcher would eventually move into an adjacent apartment across from Alice Anderson and Thomas Anderson. Geneva will go out to play with the Slade girls, eventually dating their big brother, Fletcher Slade. Geneva and Fletcher are believed to be together since the time Geneva was 12 and Fletcher was 14 years old. During this same time, Alice's sister, Geneva's Aunt Willie, had moved to Toledo, Ohio with her husband, Alfonso Lathan. Alfonso was a very proud man who had just left Alabama and changed his name. Alfonso changed his name to his older brother's name, James Lathan, who had died previously. Alfonso had to leave Alabama after two white men raped his sister. Alfonso would eventually hunt down both men, killing one and paralyzing the other for life. After living in Toledo, Willie and Alfonso would move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 1940s. This is the reason that we all live in Milwaukee today. In New York, Geneva and Fletcher are a budding young couple, happily in love, going to the local clubs, becoming two of the best swing dancers around. Geneva and Fletcher Slade were young, vibrant teens in the Bronx, but due to an illness, Fletcher's father, Fletcher Slade Sr., would become ill and die in 1944 at the age of 39. His wife Eugenia would never remarry, but would live a long, prosperous life until falling victim to a heart attack at the ripe old age of 84. This would bring Geneva and Fletcher closer together, and Geneva would eventually become pregnant with their first child, Janet Slade, or Aunt Jan, in 1946. Geneva's mother, Alice, decided to send Geneva to her sister Willie in Milwaukee since she had heard of good things and Willie had stable living conditions. After 1 year of living with Willie and having her child, Geneva would move back to New York to live with Fletcher Slade. During this time she was back in New York, Geneva finished school and advanced her life the best way she could. Geneva and Fletcher was together like she had never gone away. Geneva would get pregnant again and have her second daughter, Denise Slade, or Aunt Niece, on August 22, 1950. 1 year later, they would have another child, Aletha Slade, or Dimples, on September 2, 1951. After having 3 children and starting their family, they decided to move back to Milwaukee in 1952 because Willie had informed them of good living situations and job opportunities in Milwaukee. During this time, Geneva's father was becoming very sick and ill. While living in Milwaukee, Geneva and Fletcher would have many more children. On July 28, 1953, they would have Stephen Slade, better known as Cool Uncle Stevie. In 1954, Willie and James Lathan decided to start St. Mary's Missionary Baptist Church in the basement on 5th and Locust. That next year, Geneva joined St. Mary's Church. On September 16, 1955, Geneva and Fletcher would have their 4th daughter, Marcia Slade. Also in 1955, back in New York, Geneva's father, Thomas Anderson, died due to his sickly conditions. Once Thomas died, Alice would travel often to Milwaukee to visit her daughter and her grandchildren. In 1956, James and Willie would move their church to a building on 4th and Center where they would grow a large congregation. Geneva and Fletcher would eventually have the last of their 7 children. One being Cheryl Slade, or Aunt Cheryl, who was born on February 18, 1958. And also Dwayne Fletcher Slade, or Uncle Wanky, who was born December 3, 1962. While on a visit to Milwaukee, Alice, who was widowed, met Andrew Lathan, or Papa, who was the brother of James A. Lathan. They would become a couple and move to Birmingham, Alabama at the end of the 1950s. While in Birmingham, Alice and Andrew would open a local grocery store called Mrs. Emerson's. They gave the store this name because this is what Papa called his granddaughter, Marcia Slade. While in Birmingham, many of Alice's grandchildren and great-grandchildren would come to stay with her for periods of time for stability. This list of people consists of Aunt Jan, Marcia, Kelly, Dimples, Big G, and many more. They would live down in Birmingham until 1974, when Alice decided to come back to Milwaukee to help her many grandchildren and be closer to her family. Although Willie and James never had children of their own, they played a huge role in raising and supporting the Slade family. Helping out when financial situations were bad. When Alice returned to Milwaukee, she was the rock and glue that held our family together. Alice had many homes in Milwaukee, but none more memorable than the infamous 2-1. 21st and Burleigh is where most family members remember that they can come anytime and see any cousin on any day. Geneva moved back in with her mother Alice, and it made for a great house environment. Eventually, Fletcher Slade Jr., who was back in New York, died in January 1990. And Willie would live until 1998, when she died living under the care of her niece and adopted daughter, Cheryl Burks, and her husband, Jimmy Burks, at the age of 86. Also, Alice Anderson would die in 2001 under the care of her granddaughter, Marcia Burks, and her husband, Chester Burks, at the age of 93. Geneva Anderson would eventually die September 10, 2011, at the age of 80. This is the legacy of our family. These are the people that shaped and molded our history so that you are in the situation you are in today. Geneva's 7 kids are the 7 pillars of our family. Pillar 1, Janet's pillar. Pillar 2, Denise's pillar. Pillar 3, Aletha's pillar. Pillar 4, Stephen's pillar. Pillar 5, Marcia's pillar. Pillar 6, Cheryl's pillar. And Pillar 7, Dwayne's pillar. If you are in this room today, you are probably in one of these pillars. These people are the reasons you have the color shirts you have on today. Remember to represent your pillar and your family with the utmost respect and dignity. The decisions that people made before us still directly affect the things in our lives today. If it wasn't for these decisions that they made, you might live in a different city, have a different life, or maybe not even exist. Remember that the decisions you make will directly affect your family for the next 100 years and beyond. So build our legacy as a family. Pass it down to your children. Let them know who is important and what is important so that we can continue the legacy for the next 100 years. The end.